Right, welcome back everyone. Obviously we have already opened, so I'm going to get straight to business. But before we do that, just like to observe a moment's silence as we remember our former Prime Minister who is having his funeral today, Jim Bolger. So if we just have a moment's silence before we start. Right, thank you everyone. Right, we're here to discuss user fees and I'm going to hand over to Gareth and the team and they'll take us through it. Thank you.
Atamaria koutou. Just going to introduce Nalita Byrne, Manager of Venues and Events, and Rena Snook, who's our Baycourt Manager. And look, I'll just hand over to Rena. She is our subject matter expert. She lives and breathes Baycourt. Having said that, I worked out today, I got my first job at Baycourt in 1986. So I do also know the inside of Baycourt quite well. So yeah, exactly. Baycourt is old and so am I. Anyways, handing over to Rena, happy to answer questions as we go through, but she's got a pretty good presentation and we'll work our way through it. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Gareth. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Ko Rena Snook tuku ingoa, ko te kaiwhakahaere hinonga ki Baycourt Community and Arts Centre aho. I'm sure this is the most hotly anticipated ticket item for you today, so welcome to the Baycourt presentation. A little bit of scene setting for you. I won't read through each of these bullet points directly, but just a couple of things to bring your attention to. It's just the significant public funding that went into initially establishing Baycourt, and that has really led to an enduring sense of ownership by the community, which we still have today, 42 years on. And also, as well, good to understand that Baycourt, in the context of regional theatres in Aotearoa, is considered a leading theatre, so that's something we're all very proud of as well. So some further context just to, so you can understand some of our attendance figures, etc. So what you're looking at here is the past 5 completed financial years, the first 2 impacted by COVID. And really pleasing to see that the post-COVID recovery has been really strong for us. So on average, you've got just over 52,500 people that attended annually over the past 5 years, but if you exclude those first 2 COVID years, that number climbs to 62,500 people. So that's actually equivalent to about 4 in 10 Tauranga residents visit Baycourt annually, which is a pretty impressive number. Then what we've got here is looking at our current occupancy and utilisation, again for those past 5 financial years. COVID withstanding, you can see for the 23 through to 25 years, we've had quite high utilisation. So on average, we're returning an 80% venue utilisation, which is very good for a regional theatre the size of ours. Looking at the graph on the right, what you're seeing there is the number of event days or booked days in our system. So it's important to point out too that in the context of what we mean by community, and those 2 breakdowns that you see is whether they are eligible for our community discount or not. So that doesn't mean necessarily if you're a local group or organisation in Tauranga, you are immediately eligible for that, but those that are eligible are counted within those community event numbers. So you see there. So you can see on average about 61% of our events each year are community events and the remainder is commercial. Then looking at what are the types of events that we're hosting, by far music concerts are our bread and butter, and this is looking at the past financial year, followed closely by dance, and then our much loved citizenship ceremonies, just because of the frequency of those obviously count high into our genre count. So then getting into the nitty-gritty now, our hire fees. It is a little bit complex, we have different layers, but essentially you've got 2 tiers of venue hires at Baycourt. You've got community hires and you've got commercial. So the table that you're looking at there is what is currently charged, excluding GST, for those 2 groups. So if you are a community group and you're eligible for that discount and you want to hire our Addison Theatre for a show, you're going to pay $1,350 plus GST per show. That's what that table is telling you.
So is that like a school would be a community or?
Yes, yep.
Yep.
So if it's a local group that has community-focused content, they are eligible. Or if they are a community group and they have not-for-profit status, they are eligible. So there's very few that fall into the non-commercial category, but there are some.
Sorry, and that's per show. So if
Correct.
they were doing 3 nights, it would be
Times
three
that by
times
3.
that. Okay, and that includes your pack out and pack in and those sort of things.
There
That would
are
be an extra
separate
day.
rates for pack-in if they're having standalone pack-in or pack-out days, but yes, they would normally be a 1-day hire, so they get a little bit of pack-in time and into show time.
Great, thanks.
So then what we've done is taken some relevant research from across the motu, and this here is arranged in order of cheapest, essentially, to the most expensive regional theatres in Aotearoa. You can see where we sit there highlighted in peach. We are the second most expensive council-owned regional theatre in the country in terms of our commercial hire fees. So that just gives you a little bit of context where we sit in the market at present. The only one more expensive than us currently is Wairarapa Event Centre.
Just out of interest, do you know what the quality of those other offerings are? Or like, do we compare well, or are we?
Yeah, great question. There is a scale, for sure. We are at the upper end in terms of the level of service that we provide. We are a very well-sourced and resourced centre. And in particular, our technical services that we provide are almost second to none in the country. In that kind of middle section of that table, they're all much of a muchness. They're all very similar. But yes, some of the services we provide are at that upper end. So then what I wanted to do is just have a little look into how do our community discounts compare, because it's not quite apples with every single theatre around the country, but those that I've been able to get the detail on, what you can see there is Tauranga sits at the higher end of the discounts currently offered to community groups, with Oamaru slightly more generous discount for their community group. So we sit at 50%. So that's why in that previous table you saw of the venue hire fees, those community fees were half the price of our commercial hirers.
Sorry, are we going to come to the split of community use versus commercial use? Is that
So
somewhere?
that's in one of the earlier slides, if that's what you're meaning.
Okay, sorry.
That one there on the right-hand side, the top green, darker green, is your community events, and then the bottom is the number of commercial
sorry,
events
perfect,
by
thank you.
percentages. Yeah. Thank you. So this is just looking back at our past 5 years of hire fees with our current year on the right-hand side, and you can see the percentage increases through that time. I did want to point out the X space in particular, which is the smaller of our 2 spaces. You can see in 25-26, that space increased by 22%. And that really is to address some of the historical deficits that have been in place for that particular venue. We've worked strategically over the past sort of 4 or 5 years to make sure that gets to a point where we're actually trying to be more in profit than we are in deficit. So that's why you can see those higher percentages. Then we've got a snapshot of our revenue. So the pie graph on your left-hand side is our generated revenue. So hire fees, of course, ticketing revenue, food and beverage. We do run our own bar, technical equipment hires and other sort of bits and pieces. And then on the left-hand side is all of our revenue. So that also includes the rate funding that we receive. So you can see the two kind of compared to one another. So if you go back to that left-hand side pie graph, you can see venue hire fees are one of our highest earners. 36% of our revenue is generated through those, followed closely by the food and beverage sales, 30%, or $308,000 in 24-25. So graph on the right-hand side, user fees make up about 35%, 25% of our revenue, with the remainder as rate funding.
Could you just tell me about ticketing revenue? So is that,
Yes.
do we sell the tickets and charge a percentage or something? Is that how that
Correct. So we have a exclusive ticketing provider, and through that process, every ticket sold, there is a rebate back to the venue. So that helps us earn that revenue. Then trying to drill into some expense detail for you there. So 24-25, our total expenditure was 3.92 million. Of that, 44% comprised of those indirect costs, so depreciations, internal allocations, etc. And the remaining 56% is our direct operating costs, which cover those day-to-day operating services. Here we've just got some commentary about why we might need rate funding. To me, working in the arts industry, it's all very obvious, but hopefully you can see that the value there that this kind of service brings to the community. Happy to dive into any detail with those, but yeah. So then looking at what are our actual costs to open doors. So what does it take to open the Addison Theatre for a standard performance on any given night? So the table on the left-hand side is showing you is the Addison Theatre, and on the right-hand side our smaller X space. All of the types of labour and services we provide within that to give you a total cost. So the Addison Theatre, you can see about $2,400 to open the doors. And if you overlay over top of that the hire fees for this current year, commercial hire is $2,700. You can see we're making a small profit of just shy of $300 per event. And the community rate there is a deficit. Now, important to point out though, what that does not include is other hire fees and revenue that we generate through that event. So you're not seeing the food and beverage income that we get off the back of the events, you're not seeing any technical equipment that we hire, you're not seeing the venue hire fees and the costs, but that is what, it just gives you a snapshot of what some of those costs make up. So the point of being here today, I guess, to look at some options about what you might want to do in terms of the Baycourt user fees and charges. So we've developed several options, modelled several for you to look at, which are in the preceding slides. What these options try to do is bring that balance of value to the community and need to increase user fees and charges to offset rates. So if we could click through. I don't know how far into detail you might want to drill with these, but this first section, these next 2 pages are all about what we could do with community hirers. So you could maintain the existing 50% community discount, for example. What are the pros and cons and financial impact of that? You could increase that discount to 60%, for example, and what impact would that have, etc., etc.
So just a question on the diversity of our community use. Are we seeing, as the Mayor asked about schools, is that quite diverse, or is it 4 or 5 community users that are our main users? Yeah,
great question. We have a lot of regular hirers, but within that regularity, we have a lot of diverse content. So we are seeing everything from youth work right through to adult performance in different genres as well. We do have gaps though. So a lot of our gaps exist around cultural work. So Baycourt, largely for its 42 years, has been a very Pākehā-driven whare. So what we're trying to do now is also make sure that those ethnicities are coming into our space as well, both through content and audience development as well. So there is some work to do still there in that space, the cultural space.
Yeah, I was lucky. I went to the first
Te
Tadeo
I saw you
performance
there,
at Baycourt ever. That was probably only a couple of months ago, and also they had the graduation of the Immersion Te Reo program from the University of Waikato last week. So that was 2 in 2 months, which I thought was a good addition.
Thank you.
And just generally, does the ticket revenue cover the cost for the community group performances?
That's quite a complex question, because there are different revenue types for community groups versus commercial, but within that, I wouldn't say it would offset completely the cost that it would take to run a community event, no. Sorry, what was that? No.
No, but if you look at these figures, it'd be a lot closer to zero than what's indicated here, because you are clipping the ticket in quite a few different areas. So equipment hire, inside charges on tickets, food and beverage, all that kind of stuff. So as a general rule, you're still in the loss-leading space, but it's a lot closer to zero than the $1,000 on the left or the right that it's showing it costs to open the doors.
So just on that, so if you've got a community group that's hired it out for a performance and they are selling tickets to the public, you get a percentage of that ticket. But do we know how many of them cover those ticket sales for whatever? Because they'll be having a venue hire plus all the costs of whatever they've got to put the show on. Do we have any visibility on do art performances at a community level make money or they lose money? Is that your
Because we have a lot of regular hirers and their frequency is quite high, what I would anticipate is happening with them is that they are covering the vast majority of their costs. Right. With a lot of those youth programs in particular, so dance schools, etc., or the school groups, there's also fees that those students pay into that organisation, which help to cover and offset those big events that they have with us. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
I'm just trying to get clear. Like we've got 85 down to 76% occupancy, and then I'm looking at the slide just before where it talks about Edison and theatre and X Space and looks at what the hire fees are, and I'm thinking is it heavily occupied in the X Space and not so heavily occupied in Edison Theatre? Because when I look at those numbers and I think, right, 3/4 of it is rates funded, so we're only getting 1/4 of the revenue through user fees of various kinds, and you've already said that that on this cost to open the doors, it excludes some of that other revenue, so that'll be on top of this. If Edison Theatre is heavily, occupied, up at that 85%, I would have thought, given the balance of commercial and community, there would still be a higher amount of user fees ratio. Like I'm just not sure how these numbers stack up. And the only explanation I thought of in my mind was, is it because X Space is more heavily utilised, which is obviously a bigger loss for us.
Yeah. No, the X Space is is used far less than the Edison Theatre. So, to your point, I mean, perhaps though the cost to open doors, if you don't mind going back to that.
I suppose feeding another option, is it just that there are big fixed costs that are not factored into the cost to open the door, and so there's just so many fixed costs, overheads, that's basically what the rates is paying for to a large extent?
Some of those are staffing costs. So within the cost that you're seeing up there is not our full suite of staff. So you have technical managers, senior managers that aren't accounted for within those numbers. This is just a very small snapshot of the on-the-ground, on-the-day cost to run that event, rather than the full umbrella of overheads.
So sort of the marginal cost to open the doors for that event as opposed to the total cost to open the door. Yeah,
Correct.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Councillor Taylor.
Sorry, I don't know whether I've jumped ahead. I'm talking about your director's cut screen, which is your recommendations at this stage, I think. Most of those look pretty good. The only one that I'd probably comment on is the your hourly rate for charging out technical labour does seem ridiculously low. So I'd favour a bigger increase in that potentially.
Yes, and if we also, on that point, if you look, which we have nationally across the board, a lot of them are at the $50 an hour mark or more, so that's an option.
Coming from out of the construction industry, you'd be lucky to get a plumber for under $100 odd. So they do look extremely cheap. The second one, and I don't know whether it's appropriate to be talking about it here, is we've obviously got some plans that I've been reading about the upgrade of Baycourt and how that might fit. There's obviously going to be pressure on these user fees and things when that happens, and I understand you'll have potentially more capacity to get more income. Do you want to just give me a quick thoughts on changes, and I'm specifically thinking about things you might lose once Te Manawa is complete. There could be more things like the citizenship ceremonies that move to the Civic Chamber, that sort of stuff.
Yes, great question. So the footprint of Baycourt is very limited in terms of what we can do in our front of house spaces to generate revenue. So if you've been to Baycourt before during a show, you will have queued no doubt at the bar or queued to even get into the bathrooms. And we only have, at intermission for example, 20 minutes to get people watered and back into the theatre, and you can't possibly get through that queue because of how small our bar is and the foyer itself. So a lot of what we hope will be a refresh for us is to maximise those opportunities. So food and beverage is a big revenue earner for us, as you could see, 36% venue hire fees versus a 30% venue food and beverage sales. So if we can maximise those opportunities, that will really start to move that dial for us. We've also got some trouble operating between both Addison and the X space. So at the moment there is a noise conflict between the spaces, so we can't have things running concurrently. So that really hamstrings us in terms of two things on at the same time, double the crowd, double the hire fees that we can achieve in any single day. So those types of improvements that have been drafted to date look to address those concerns. They're more focused on our front of house spaces and our ability to generate revenue and improve the visitor experience as well, which is key. Oh yes, some activities. Citizenships in particular, no offence to citizenships, but they're not high revenue earners for us. So if we were to lose that particular content, there's some other things that we could absolutely put in its place. We have frequently inquiries that we can't accommodate because we're already booked during the day, so we could be an opportunity more than a loss. Councillor.
Yeah. I was just going to add to that. I definitely think that there's a queue of people that would love to use Baycourt, and it is frequently booked. And I think spreading out the activities across the Te Manawa or Te Papa precinct is a great opportunity for Baycourt to generate new and different business. And the other key thing that I think we'll have a conversation with you about in the coming weeks, but Baycourt is very restricted by capacity, and it's not a particularly attractive venue for promoters because you can only get a relatively small amount of people. So the high cost to get in the building and put on a show is normally offset by the ability to have a higher number of people come and watch it. And at Baycourt, because that's less than 600, it does make it very challenging for promoters to make things work in Baycourt. So that is something that we'll have a conversation about, and that's probably one of the key things that restricts Baycourt's ability to be able to generate more revenue.
Just on that too, some of the notes that you'll see in the presentation talks to our competition in the market as well. So we've got to be very mindful that the Waikato Regional Theatre is opening in a couple of short months in Hamilton. That will be 1,300 seats, their theatre, a beautiful space. Then you also have the Sir Howard Morrison Centre in Rotorua, which has been open for a couple of years now, which has 1,000. So when a promoter is deciding whether to come to Tauranga or to Rotorua, they go, oh, I have to do 2 nights in Baycourt and Tauranga versus 1 night in Rotorua. Yeah, I'll probably go to Rotorua because that will be more affordable for me. And we're talking about the commercial touring product here, not necessarily our local content, but yeah.
Can I just check, is the implication of what you said earlier that the occupancy or utilisation rate is only one at a time? So therefore, I was kind of thinking there'd be times where you'd have a quiet event in one space and something in the other. Do you do that, or do you basically have a rule just one or other is occupied?
No, we run things simultaneously if we can. So sometimes the show in the Addison Theatre will allow us to do something still in the X space. So we absolutely try and maximise that utilisation where we can, but there'll be others where we can't manage 2 things at the same time.
So is the percentage, is it a percentage of both being fully occupied, or have you already knocked out some of the occupancy because of that conflict issue?
It's based on the full calendar year. So if one thing is booked into Baycourt on a day, so it doesn't matter what space, that is counted as one. So yes, correct. Yeah.
Just sorry to, don't want to flog a dead horse or anything, but I presume the implication is if we were to expand and put some soundproofing type thing, or whatever you're thinking of doing, that could literally, at its optimal, it could double the occupancy rate, because it wouldn't just be 1 tick per day, we could get 2 ticks per day by concurrent events and more events because of capacity, all that sort of stuff. There's scope, plenty of scope for growth, you're saying?
Correct.
So I guess this slide here is the one that we'd love to get some feedback on. It's a summary of the 3 previous slides with all of the kind of suggestions in terms of how we could maximise revenue at Baycourt by changing user fees and charges. We've already had one suggestion in regards to number 5 and the technical labour charge perhaps being a little bit light, so happy to take that on board. Just interested in any other feedback.
Well, my feedback is that it's really tweaking, and it wouldn't have too much potential negative effect, is my sort of guess. But then you consider the benefit to the ratepayer. You're only talking about not much over $1 a year for the rateable property. So, yeah. So I'm happy to proceed because it's consistent with the approach over the last few years to continue tweaking. But yeah, I hate to over tweak where you get a lot of drop off in terms of particularly community use. There's a lot of social value in that. So I'm comfortable with proceeding, consulting on that basis.
And I think any change to the community discount in particular, which has stood for at least 30 years from what I understand, will have an impact on the community. They will have something to say about that, so it's good for you to consider that that is a factor. So while it might not have huge rate impact, it will impact them. And we have done some modelling on that, and at a quick glance it's looking like anywhere between sort of $100 to $250 per event. Their budget might be impacted negatively by a change from 50 to 40% discount. Correct, yeah.
This is a bit of a weird one. Have you ever done a comparison with what it might cost to hire a basketball court, for example?
I have not, but I will take that on board.
I was thinking in terms of, the reality in our city of having the obvious competition, if you like, and there are various size venues, but certainly, Holy Trinity's one that's obvious, and how that might fit in terms of pricing. and St Peter's is, I think, increasingly recognised as good acoustics, and so there's a lot of community groups go there as a preference because of the sound and the size, which is a bit smaller. But I'm just wondering, how do we compare in terms of looking at those venues for pricing?
We don't have any recent rates from Holy Trinity in particular, but they are certainly on our radar as one of our competitors in the sense of the word. It's a beautiful space and the acoustics are lovely, and that capacity of around 800 seats that they have makes it a no-brainer sometimes for some shows. But their level of service is very different, including everything from their food and beverage offer right through to what the promoter needs to bring in to service that event versus what's already in-house. So it's not quite apples with apples, but we can certainly look at that.
I think that'd be helpful. The other question I had was just with the technician, is that per hour cost the actual all-up cost that you would pay for that technician? And so anything that's the charge-out rate has got an inbuilt margin already, and we're just talking about how much extra the margin is?
That $45 or $48 rate is what we're charging the clients. So there is already a margin built into that.
So in the other table where it lists it, how many hours typically for each venue you put in it?
That's the cost to us.
Because I
to
guess
council.
my comment in terms of what you wanted feedback on would be, I think with the sort of non-profits and non-profits kind of thing, but the smaller ones, I think, number one, they would often have to fork out for the GST if they're not GST registered. And secondly, if there's a compulsory element to having to get technicians in, if they can't find, some in-kind support somewhere in the community, then that would add another barrier. And when I look at this sort of cost-benefit analysis, my own take on it would be, for the benefit we get, I'd almost think it'd be better to keep the community discount at 50% because it's already quite a barrier, having talked to numbers, operated in the non-profit space for a number of years and knowing what people think about these charges. And also that I guess the cost being high per hour anyway compared to other parts of the country apart from Oamaru, that this sort of balances that out a little bit, giving a higher discount. And I would be interested in sort of, whether the technical labour could be charged more for commercial, but looking at the community side of it and seeing if that could be incorporated into, to Rod's point, if you get even higher and you're charging it out at maybe twice cost for a commercial, if that's competitive, then you give a 50% discount to that as well for those hours, so long as we cover our costs for that. But I don't know if the maths will work out. But to me, I'm keep thinking we've got to reduce those barriers until we get better occupancy in both those venues.
Just an observation on the Holy Trinity, but it's actually probably a question from me for Rena. My observation is that Holy Trinity gets used more because of the unavailability of Baycourt rather than its suitability as a venue because of the lack of level of service. So not exclusively, but I'm interested if that's true or not.
I think to an extent some of that is true. We'll receive inquiries first, and if we don't have availability, we will offer other venues in the city. Holy Trinity is often one of those if we don't have capacity. But it's not solely the reason either that they use the space.
So that just in terms of if the commercial goes up 3%, then the community pays 50% of that 3% plus another 10% of the 100%.
I don't quite get the last part of that, but the first part, yes.
They've gone from 50% discount down to 40%, and the base that they're paying off has gone up 3%.
Correct.
Yeah. So I probably agree with comments about I want the community to use it, and I think that's, to me, something we have to be, in terms of, I agree with my colleague that, this is in line with, making sure we are charging, a little bit more, but I'm not sure that difference that we're getting back in the scheme of things actually is worth it in terms of the risk of therefore less community players enjoying this facility. I think the technical labour hours I think is really sensible that we're looking at those. I probably would question whether they're quite enough because it's probably a different line on the, it's not a line that's, on your per seat charge, is that just the venue hire or venue hire including technical?
It's just the venue hire, the commercial venue hire.
Yeah, so therefore I would sort of suggest that we could probably go up a little bit on the charging out of the technical, because those fees look low for a technical person. But I also just want to say that every time you go past Baycourt when there's an event on, unbelievable, that's the number of people we want in our city. And if Te Manawa Autapapa offers some more facilities, or Holy Trinity does, that's fantastic, because 100% we want to be encouraging this sort of activity in our city.
Okay. So we're going to look into increasing the hourly technical labour charge more than what is on the screen there, and there's, at least from two people, a general feeling that maintaining the community discount at 50% is probably an appropriate place to be.
And so at the moment, you can't, it's an either-or proposition, is that right? You can't effectively use the two because of the noise in the amenity and facility?
No, as I was saying earlier, we coordinate two things happening at once simultaneously, but often the shows that are in the Addison Theatre, which is our preferred space, obviously with its capacity, it will dictate that we can't have something that same evening, for instance, in the X space, but we might have something during the day, for example, like a meeting or a workshop.
Quite regularly, the teams schedule start and finish times, so that something might finish in the in the X space in a suitable time to allow you to get an evening show away in Baycourt. And I've been working at shows in Baycourt where I'm not allowed to do sound check on a night because it's going to make a whole lot of noise for an event that's happening in the X space. So the team worked pretty hard to squeeze as much life out as possible out of both venues with the constraints we've got in terms of noise bleed. Yeah.
And the constraints too in that front of house space. So if we have an audience departing from the X space and arriving for the Addison, that's very difficult to manage in that little space. So yeah, there's a few factors.
So just a shout out for the Tauranga Arts Festival that starts tonight. So that obviously uses the X space and the Addison Theatre. So I thought there were times that they did, we've got a show in the X and then we go into Baycourt, because I think that is managed right through for the Tauranga Arts Festival?
Correct. They coordinate their schedules quite intensively, so yes, so they can get that double bang for your buck, two shows at once. After
Which everyone who goes will get a double bang for your buck.
Yeah, I guess my personal view is, we should look at reducing the community discount. I think, if you look at it compared to what we do around the country, we're very generous. And what we're hearing is this space is almost at capacity and already people are having to go elsewhere. So, I think a small, and if you look at that, really we're very much playing around the edges. If we don't do that, we're basically saying we're not gonna make a meaningful difference anyway. I think 10% is still pretty reasonable. If you look at some of the other facilities around the country, it's even lower at 30%. So yeah, I'm quite comfortable with that, looking at that. But yeah, no, I think that's the key thing. It goes out to consultation, and if there's I agree with the other comments. We don't want to detract people from using it, but on the flip side, we also, at the moment, the ratepayer is paying for every show that's there from community people, and you've got to balance it up at somewhere, and I just think that's a slightly better balance, but that's just my personal view. Anyone else want to talk before we wrap it up?
I guess for me, I see a difference between the Addison Theatre and the X Space, especially hearing that the X Space isn't as well utilised. And I think it's more comparable to the Holy Trinity Hall, to St Peter's, to even to Wesley Church, and then others outside of Te Papa. And when I look at those fees, like, we are just magnitudes out for some of those, or all of them really. And I think when you're, as in they're way cheaper, yeah, like way cheaper. So the problem we have is that we could try to get more money, but I haven't seen evidence that we're going to do it, because having operated a little bit in that space, you know, most non-profits, I think, community groups, they would just have to face reality. Like, they're going to have to charge a hang of a lot of money to get 220 seats and cover all their costs, or they'll go for a cheap place and save, you know, maybe $1,000, maybe $800, depending on which one. And most of those smaller community groups are in that space. So if you think there's evidence you can get more by putting the charges up as proposed, I'd be very open to that. But I think my worry is that we treat both the same, and I think X Space is a very different kind of venue from what I understand, with a different market, and we need to be more nuanced. And so I could go along with the Mayor's point and others' points around the bigger venue, and it is a professional setting, quality, but the one suggestion, could you come back with an option that would strip out some of the support and say, we're not going to try to offer a fixed price only, we'll give you with all the bells and whistles, but here's the core. If you just want to do what you do at Wesley Church or at Holy Trinity Hall or whatever, and they have slightly different levels of service too, but you know, we just have the basic. You can just hire it out, and given that it sounds like it's very underutilised at the moment, when you weigh everything up, you know, that could be a way of getting more money by actually dropping that cost, but stripping out some of our costs in the process.
Yep. We can look at the levels of service for that. There's certain things that we can't let go, like health and safety and things like that, but we can definitely look at that. The good news is our community will definitely have something to say about this, so that we can go out and consult on 40 and 50%, and we'll definitely get some feedback, which is great. And the only other thing I was going to say, which is, I mean, you guys all know it, but even a $50,000 change in or increase in revenue, if every activity area and council was doing that, it adds up. And so Baycourt work pretty hard to try and squeeze as much as they can and run a pretty tight ship. But $50,000, you know, it contributes, I guess is my point.
I think my comments looking at the numbers is I don't mind if we have no events in the X Space because it'll cost us less. So
I think the community would have something to say about that as well.
Hence, that's why I said we need to make it stack up. And I guess I felt like having hired it out in the past, it was great. Like, I like not having to do as much work, but I was used to having got a bunch of volunteers doing a lot of that stuff, and unless we're concerned about the well-being of the building or something, but I mean, most community groups I don't think anyone has problems that I hear of.
Thanks everyone, appreciate the feedback. Kia ora, Rina and Nalita.
thank you very much. So that ends today's workshops, and that's the final one. So hand over to Councillor Baker if he could give us a closing karakia. Thank you.
Aira, kia o te rangi au me hui e tae ki e.
Thank you very much, everyone.